Welcome everyone to another amazing episode of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. Joining me today is the man with the mustache and beard, Andrew, and I'm your host today, Jesse. Every week what we do is we have an interesting fishing fact to start off the episode, and to handle that we have Andrew.
All right, so this week I wanted to talk about something that it's been showing up a lot on my social media feeds, and it's something that is probably one of the most recognizable landmarks of North America, especially Canada, is Niagara Falls. Something that I know anyone that is listening to this podcast, even if you're not from, Niagara Falls for us is only like an hour and a half away. And for those, who are living further away, if you are out in Alberta or you're in Scotland, or if you're, down in the States somewhere, I'm pretty sure you've heard of Niagara Falls.
Isn't it like one of the 7 wonders of the world?
Yeah, I think so. It's
so
pretty well
fair
known.
to say most people have heard of it. Yeah.
So some interesting facts about Niagara Falls is every second, 3,160 tons of water cross over the falls. It's when you combine all three, they form the second largest waterfall in the world, the largest being Victoria Falls. Now we have to split it a little bit. So my favorite part of Niagara Falls is the horseshoe because one, it's in Canada, and the other two sections of the falls is right on the border of America. So American has the American Falls and Bridal Veil Falls, which that accounts for 75,750 gallons per second. And the Horseshoe Falls have 681,750 gallons per second.
Wow.
So the Horseshoe Falls is the main body of water that's coming from the Niagara River and coming off. Now, the reason why I'm giving those facts is because it's important to understand how powerful Niagara Falls is, because as I mentioned before, I've been seeing on my social media feeds video of a deer being swept over the falls. I don't know if you've ever seen that before, Jesse. It's a deer swimming in the water and unfortunately drops off. That deer, from all the research I've seen, that didn't survive. I'm sorry. But it got me thinking of what other stuff has gone over the falls. First of all, I'm thinking, okay, it's water. Do fish go over the falls? Yes, it makes sense. Fish are going to go over. They're going to come from upstream, be swept down. Maybe they can't keep up with the current and they get swept over. Now, most of the time, they say that fish survive this fall with no issue. It's crazy, but they survive it. They're used to having lots of pressure, not like water pressure and stuff like that. They're used to that. If they get stunned, what happens is the birds below the falls will usually eat them as they float to the surface. So there are some fish casualties, but usually it's only because they're stunned. They don't die from the drop. They're just knocked out and then birds eat them. But some other things. So first of all, one fish that I'm not sure if the fish got injured, but someone did. There's a tourist going through the Cave of Winds, which is on the American Falls, and got hit by a salmon that fell down the falls.
What?
I can imagine that. Just like, now, we've had our ankles busted up by Chinook in the creek. I can't imagine having one drop down like 90 feet from above and just land on
that's
me.
crazy.
Thankfully, it kind of only grazed the guy. It wasn't actually a full contact dead center hit. That would have been a very different statistic if that was the case. But in 1901, there was Ligara, went over the falls as a test run in a barrel. Now, Ligara was a cat, poor cat. And again, like I said, that was a test run for Annie Taylor's barrel rides. And Annie Taylor became the first person to ever successfully survive going over the falls in a barrel. Another interesting person who went over the falls was October 22nd, 2003, Kirk Jones. Now, he was drinking with some friends and then had the genius idea of film me while I jump and start swimming over the falls, go over the falls, and then it'll all be on film. It'll be hilarious. Well, he jumped in the water, he swam, got swept over the falls, he went down, and he became the first person to survive going over the falls completely unaided. Not in a barrel, not in anything. Just a guy. And that was in 2003. He survived. However, his buddies were too drunk to work the camcorder, so there's no footage. He got fined $2,300 and was banned from Canada for life.
I was going to say when you said that, was he drunk? Because when someone gets drunk and they say if you fall from a high distance, your body just goes limp so you don't get hurt?
Yes.
That makes sense. He's drunk. He jumps off the falls and if you were completely sober and that happened, you're probably dead.
Yeah, the first person to survive an unaided, journey over the falls. Now, I do not advocate doing so. However, if you're going to do something stupid, do it drunk. That's the lesson learned.
I was going to say, if you've ever had to take a picture of someone's PB fish, their personal best size fish, and the picture doesn't turn out, you know how bad you feel? Like, it's never happened to me because I take amazing photos. But
Right.
imagine filming your buddy jumping over Niagara Falls to get banned for life and possibly dying, and you forgot how to turn on a camera because you're so hammered. What a chump.
Another awesome thing was, so this is another joint venture. So we talked about the cat, Ligara, and Annie Taylor. So they went separately. However, another man and an animal went over together in a barrel. So it was George and Sonny. Now, Sonny was a turtle, and they were sealed in an airtight barrel. This is on July 5th, 1930. They went over the falls, and they both survived the drop. However, what often happens with these barrels is it'll get caught behind the falls. And unfortunately, that's what happened. So it was caught behind the falls for a few hours before they were able to get it retrieved. And they opened the barrel, and unfortunately, George had suffocated. On the bright side, Sonny survived. So the turtle was A-OK.
Why a turtle?
I don't know. Now, I have one more thing that I had never heard of, and I don't know how I've never heard of this. This is one of the best stories I've ever heard come out of Canada as true events. It was actually the first tourism promotion ever held at Niagara Falls. This was in 1827. A group of hotel owners thought that, the falls, they're great and all, but we need a hook, something that'll really bring the people in. So they cooked up this promotional event where they bought a condemned lake schooner, like a big boat called the Michigan. And then they printed up a bunch of pamphlets and handed them out all over in Canada and the States around the falls. The pamphlet read, "The pirate Michigan, with a cargo of ferocious wild animals, will pass the great rapids and falls of Niagara. 8th September 1827 at 6 o'clock. So, first of all, a little bit of information about this. The Merchant, the ship, it was used as the Michigan, it was used as a merchant ship on Lake Erie until it was condemned because it was an old ship. What they did was they kind of dressed the ship up like a pirate ship. They had some human dummies. They tied them to the deck so they'd be standing there. And then they filled the ship with some cargo. And they thought that if they sent it through the deep water of the river and it got through the rapids, they figured this will make it over the falls and be fine. Which, if you've ever seen the falls, I don't know how they ever thought that would work. They claimed to have on board young, especially strong panthers, wildcats, and wolves. And their reason for saying that they're young and especially strong is because they figured they'd be able to survive. Now, in reality, what you want to take a guess as to what they had on board, Jesse? Now, there is a variety of animals. I'll say that. But take a guess as to what you think they might be putting on board of this ship to send over the falls in the expectation that it should survive. I don't know how they thought that. What do you think's on board?
I think like farm animals, like cows.
That's a good thought. No, I don't know why. So they had a buffalo, 2 small bears, 2 raccoons, a dog, 15 geese, 2 foxes, and an eagle.
Makes sense.
So their plan, which happened, they towed this boat full of these animals and these dummies on board and stuff like that. They towed it to Navy Island, upstream of the falls, and they let it loose. Now it got to the rapids, and the hull tore open, and the 2 bears actually escaped. They swam over to Goat Island. Now, the rest of the animals, I don't know why the bears weren't, but the rest were. The rest of the animals were tied or caged on this boat. But, the bears, let's just let them run into the wild. It made it over the falls, and unfortunately, 1 goose survived. That's it.
Wow.
Of all that stuff. And yeah, so that was the first tourism promotion ever held at the falls. And I don't know about you, but I would definitely watch that. No. That's like, what? You know how in movies are always like, no animals are harmed in the making of this film? It's like, guess what? We harmed all the animals in the making of this hotel promotion.
Yeah, that wouldn't fly this time and age, would it?
That was the 1820s. What can you say?
Yeah.
So thankfully, I have no plans of going over the falls. I'm hoping no one else does because the statistics state that only about 25% of people who go over survive. Those aren't great odds.
No, not very good. And I think every time I go to the falls, when you're standing right there, you always forget how much like awesome power the falls is. So intimidating.
Yeah.
Like I can't even say that unless I was under the influence of some weird thing that I'd ever like stand up there and jump off the falls and think that I was going to survive. Like, it is terrifying.
Well, the amount of force that water has is one other thing I didn't mention is at the bottom of Horseshoe Falls, so the big one, there's 2,509 tons of force that this water is hitting the bottom with. Because it's so much. Like, that's why these things, like fish can survive, because apparently they get cushioned by like all the air bubbles in the water, and they kind of just dive bomb into the water. But anything that's, not a fish is there just getting hammered by this water as soon as they go over. Like, that's crazy pressure.
I would die. I'm not a fish.
Absolutely.
Did they bury those people in barrels? That's my question. How ironic.
Why don't they just send them over in coffins instead of barrels and just save time?
Yeah. That's interesting. And again, Niagara Falls, like I actually just drove through Niagara Falls the other day on my way to New York. And it is, if you've never been to Niagara Falls, I know it's kind of crowded now and stuff, but you've got to see it at least once before you kick, because it is truly, especially like Andrew said, Horseshoe Falls, like the Canadian falls, way better than the American side. No offense, Americans, but it is awe-inspiring. It's just insane, the amount of water and the noise and the mist. Like I remember one time I was working somewhere in Niagara Falls near the falls, I guess, and we parked and we came back and the car was just wet from the mist. I was like, oh man, people's cars must rust really bad here. Just constantly moist. Ugh.
It's crazy to go in the winter and just everything is coated in perpetual ice. It's nuts.
Yeah. It's a death trap. So that was interesting. Again, like I said, Niagara Falls is something that, again, everyone's probably heard of it, especially if you live in Ontario or, I guess North America in general, but I don't think everyone's been there. So definitely check it out if you haven't.
It's the honeymoon capital of the world.
Yeah. My honeymoon wasn't there, but yeah. But I was going to say, lots of really good fishing below the falls too. So not like right below the falls where those whirlpools of death are, but slightly further down.
Right below where you can get hit by a salmon coming over.
Yeah. So anyway, this episode of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast is about one of our most wanted and downloaded topics of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast history, which is, you guessed it, fishing for pike. Surprisingly enough, we have done podcasts on everything from steelhead fishing, bass fishing, muskie fishing. The two biggest podcasts that have the most downloads, some of it double some of our most other popular downloads, is all about pike fishing. People love pike fishing. We get asked questions all the time. I think it's one of those fish that they're everywhere, but not everyone fishes for them, or they haven't fished for them before. So I think that's why there's so much curiosity about them, because they can get big. They hit anything, usually. We're going to get into that. And they're cool looking fish. I think they're just underrated. What do you say?
Absolutely. And it's weird because it's one of those fish that you're going to hear, like I said, we have the statistics to show that it is popular. People want to learn more about fishing for them. And yet it's also one of the fish that you're going to hear the most hate about. Like walleye guys are like, oh, there's pike. Muskie guys are like, oh, dang, I caught a pike. Like so many people don't like them. Bass fishermen, oh, pike bit off my frog. Like there's so much hate surrounding them. And yet I love fishing for them. Like you said, they're awesome fish. They're cool. And people are interested in it. So I can never talk about pike enough. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Actually, the first good fish of the year that we caught was a really nice pike. Again, like we said, me and Andrew, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, we've probably made mention of fishing at Andrew's cottage back in the day, back when we were like, 12, 13, 14 years old and on. And we fished for pike. That was our main target fish. We love fishing for it. Up north in Northern Ontario, there are massive pike. And even in Southern Ontario, you do have the possibility of catching a 40-inch fish. A lot of the lakes that you fish will have what they call hammer handles, right?
Yeah.
Which is just like a small, skinny, slimy, annoying pike. And I get it. If I'm bass fishing and I'm, getting bit off by little pike that are like 12 inches long, that's annoying. But we're not talking about catching tiny little hammer handles. We're talking about slightly bigger ones and hopefully even bigger ones.
Oh, so, well, then I have nothing to add to this podcast. I'm sorry.
But just to add to that too, I know everyone hates pike. Not everyone, but a lot of people, like you said, hate pike. But we have a few lakes that we know if we go out there with some of the lures we're going to talk about, we can catch a handful or oftentimes, a dozen or even more pike that are in the 3 to 5 pound range, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you said that about a bass fishing day, you'd be like, I had a great day, man. I caught 10 fish, a bunch of them 2, 3, 4 pounds, even 1 5-pounder. And everyone would be like, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
You say the same thing about pike and no one, no, whatever, But a fish is a fish to me. I can have a fun day, especially if you're fishing with someone that maybe is new to fishing or they just, you just want to have one of those days where you catch a bunch of fish. Pike fishing is fantastic. So we're going to talk about a little bit about that. Depending on where you live in Ontario, or maybe if you're listening from the States or other parts of the world, we don't know exactly when your fishing season would be. In our area, it's the first week or the second week or the third week of May, depending on what zone you are in Ontario. So this podcast coming out around the second week of May. Pike season may already be open in your area, or it might be fast approaching. So we're going to go over some generalized ways that you can find pike, and then we're going to talk about some lures that we use to catch them. I have a lot of people ask, when's the best time to catch pike? Actually, that's one of the questions. We're going to do some Q&A after. But we're talking about May fishing. So we all know, we had a pre-spawn pike episode a few episodes back. Definitely check that out if you haven't listened to that. But when it comes to like May fishing, Andrew, for pike, what is the pike's behavior at that point? Like, we know like they're done spawning generally. Yep. How are they compared to the way they were in like March?
In March, they were very lethargic. Like, they just came out of the cold water. They were getting ready for spawn. They were, they may have been putting on a bit of a feed, but they feed a bit throughout a winter too. So it's not as crazy as some other species before their spawn. But as soon as May hits and the water's getting warmer, it's now getting to be closer to their preferred temperature, and they start feeding like aggressively. It's one of those things where they can still be found in the shallow water because that is where the good temperature is. It's not like it's all just super warm shallows now, like midsummer. So they're still found shallow. They're still found in that new weed growth, and they can be extremely aggressive. And now is the time where they're really putting on that feedback. Their spawn is done. They're tired. They're done with winter, just like all of us are. And now they're like, give me that food.
As we were saying before, you can catch some really giant pike in March, because what happens is these big pike, the big female pike, they're going to come in from, big water, go into these shallow bays, get ready to spawn. They don't generally spawn till sometime in April. That's why a lot of the times pike season is closed for April. It'll be like, March 31st, and then boom, it's closed for April, and then boom, the first week of May, it's back open again, because overall, most pike spawn in that time frame. Now, it's going to depend on the weather and all that stuff, but so March is a great time to catch big pike. April, they're spawning, and then May, like Andrew said, when the water's not warm yet, it's still like, you get these days, when finally you're just like, you know what, I can wear like just a light hoodie and go fishing. I love that. The chill and the dampness of early spring is gone. You're starting to get those nice days. The water still hasn't caught up yet. So some of these fish, the big females, they can still be found in shallowish water. You'd find most of them in shallow water in April, but you can't generally fish for them. So that's the problem. So as soon as you get some of those nice days, a lot of these big females will head back into deeper water. But early May, you can still find them.
And deeper water too. Yeah, I was going to say, like, deeper water is always
subjective to the lake that you're in.
Right? Yeah. So the other thing too is a lot of times when pike spawn, their backs are out of the water. And the stuff they're spawning in, it can be like 6 inches of water, a foot of water. It can be super, super shallow in these bays because that's where it's going to have the warmest temperature.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they go back into the deeper water, that could be anything from like 4 to 7 feet. It's, you could be bottoming out by you fishing a jerkbait in that depth. So it's, again, it doesn't have to be, thinking of, I need to have super heavy weight or I need to start downrigging around drop-offs for these big fish. No, they've just dropped back kind of into the same area where these other species of fish are getting ready for their spawn, like the crappie, like the bass. They're getting ready to come into these shallows. The pike have already spawned. And so now they're just feeding on these other fish that are just coming into their territory now.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, like, there's one lake that we fish. We talk about it a lot, and it's very shallow. I think the deepest spot on that lake is 10 feet deep. It's very shallow. Yeah. So deep in that lake is 8 to 10 feet. In other lakes, it may be 30 feet. So it really depends. These big fish, big pike, are more like lake trout than anything. They love cold water. So in the summer heat, oftentimes you'll hear people and they're like, all I catch is hammer handles. It's like, yes, because those big pike, they're nowhere near the shallows most of the time. Like, oddly, you might find one that cruises up in there, but they like cold water, so they're going to be in deeper water. But this time of year, May, the water, like we said, is still a little bit cool, and pike like that. So you can oftentimes have a good selection of, hammer handles, little small ones, and a mixture of decent sized pike too, mixed in there. I think it's funny, in May, you'll catch a lot of pike that have battle wounds. And oftentimes, I've seen it a few times, when you see the pike kind of spawning, and they're literally like attacking each other, these pike, and they're just fighting over mating positions and stuff. And oftentimes you'll catch these pike and their fins are all ripped up. They've got like just wounds on the side of them. And oftentimes you'll say, wow, what happened to this pike? like a bird hit it or something. It's like, no, another pike literally bit it. These things are crazy.
Yeah.
If you ever have a few minutes, go on YouTube and look up like spawning pike. It's pretty aggressive. They're not gentle lovers. They're really aggressive. So if you ever catch a pike and it looks all beat up, don't worry. They do heal. And by the time it's the summertime, usually they look pretty normal again.
And the males will bite the female right during the spawn. They'll start biting them to kind of trigger that spawn. But the males themselves can, like you said, can get aggressive. And what you'll often find is you'll have a big female, like you'll see that 3-footer or that 4-footer coming through.
Yeah.
And then you see a bunch of what look like hammer handles or like 22, 24-inch pike coming in behind. And those are like 5 males following this one female, trying to be like the guy. Kind of like high school, you know?
Yeah. I was float fishing one time in the lower section of a creek in April for trout. It's kind of a creek that runs through a marsh. So oftentimes the northerns come in there to spawn because there's a lot of reeds and, you know, timber and structure that they can spawn in. And I was just float fishing, just, you know, minding my own business. All of a sudden I looked down. There was this huge pike just swimming along with all these little males, like you said, like 20 inches, right? Little hammer handles.
Yeah.
But there was like 5 of them. And they were just all like trying to get like with her beside her. And she was just like swimming like she didn't have a care in the world. It's like, get out of here.
Yep.
So pretty much like Andrew in high school, just get out. I have too many girls after me. Come on. I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
I have to show you a picture of what Andrew looked like in high school. But anyway.
They called me beach ball.
I didn't. So let's talk about, we kind of covered some of the locations, but what would you say would be prime locations for May fishing? So say like Andrew, we're going out, we're going pike fishing. It's May. We're fishing, say, a lake, maybe a deeper river. Where is the first place you're going to look for these pike?
Still, like we talked about in our early spring pike fishing, is water inlets. They're still there. That's still going to be a great source of food. It's also oftentimes these are coming from shallow areas. So sometimes the water temperatures are a little bit warmer at the water inlets. And so these pike will oftentimes still be around there, perhaps, you know, a little bit further away, not right up in the shallows, or maybe not right in that river anymore, that small creek coming in, but they'll often be around the mouth still. And that would kind of be like my first, especially if it has access nearby to a really nice, you know, ideal spawning ground, like a shallow bay, or it goes into a marsh area. If that's close by near the water inlet, I'm focusing around the river mouth and kind of in front of that bay.
Definitely. And I think if you're just getting into pike fishing, or maybe it's something that you haven't done that much, maybe you're a guy that fishes bass or trout or whatever, pike are ambush predators. They hide and they wait for something to swim by, hopefully your lure, and then they spring out very fast. They're hiding, and they like to hide in what? Weeds. They love weeds. You know, sometimes we'll be floating in the canoe just very quietly, just gliding over like calm water, and you'll just see a pike like just sitting right below the boat in a bunch of weeds. And then as you drift over, it just spooks and just, you know, gets out of there. But at the time when you look down, you won't even see them half the time because of their patterning. They're pretty camouflaged. It's pretty amazing, actually. And they kind of like are different shades depending on the depth that they come from. Sometimes you notice they're either lighter or darker. So they're really like, the camouflage on these fish is amazing. They also love hiding around logs and trees. Caught some pretty good pike over the years near big logs. I know, like at Andrew's Cottage, oftentimes we'd go up around the corner and there's all these logs sticking out of the water. We'd always catch pike there because pike like to hide in the shadows underneath the logs, just waiting for some dumb thing to swim by, which could be anything. Pike eat anything. Could be a minnow, could be a perch, could be a muskrat, could be a duckling, doesn't matter. Whatever swims by, if they can fit it in their mouth, they're going to try anyway. You've probably seen some footage of pike on YouTube or Instagram, and it's a pike eating another pike and it's choked to death because it's a 20-inch pike trying to swallow a 15-inch pike. So not saying you have to use lures that big, but don't worry if you're using something slightly big because a pike will still hit it.
It's amazing the size of something where, like, I remember using the big Williams wobblers and I was catching hammer handles.
Yeah.
Like they had no problem going after that thing.
Yeah.
Another thing that pike often eat, like you mentioned, you know, ducklings or, but also in the springtime, like around this time of year, you have the frogs coming back out.
Yeah.
And so frogs is another like preferred forage for pike that a lot of guys, some guys won't think to use topwaters. And sometimes it can be aggravating because, again, they have terrible aim because as soon as they open their mouth to like eat something, they go blind. They can't see in front of them anymore. So they're just guessing as to where it's going to be when they hit it. And they're not that smart. Pike are not smart. And so depending on the top water you're using, they'll miss it like 7 times before they actually connect with the hook.
Yeah.
But it is fun. They'll keep going after it till they get it. And it is a blast.
Yeah, it's true. Some of the coolest pike that I've ever caught have been on top water. Yeah.
When they jump out of the water 3 feet, do 2 somersaults. It's like what the steelhead guys talk about, but you can fish in like warmer temperatures and you're tossing, you got top water. It's like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah, it is very cool. So another thing I would say too is the way that I view when I go pike fishing is, especially this time of year before it gets too warm, so I'm going to start shallow. And depending on the day, because fish are living creatures. They're not always specifically in one area. It's like, oh, it's the second week of May, I have to be in this depth. They don't care about that. They're just adapting to their environment and their situation. So I'm going to start shallow, which could be anywhere from like 2 feet, 1 foot, 2 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot. And then if I'm not catching anything in an area where it just looks fishy, sometimes we'll get to an area and I'm like, oh, this just looks fishy. Like there's something here. But if you're fishing those areas and you're blanking, there's nothing there, what should you do? Move deeper. That's always the answer. Don't fish 4 foot. Go try fish 8 foot or go fish 12 foot. The fish are somewhere. They're not nowhere. They have to be there unless it's a lake that, me and Andrew kept a few pike every time we went out, which we don't. Yeah.
And you say like start shallow. And like you said, there are still times where they will be up super shallow to the point where I've seen them almost like they're against the shore.
Yeah.
They are right against the shore. And depending on how soon the spawn was or what the temperature is like, or what they're feeding on. If they're feeding on emerging frogs, they're going to be right there against the shoreline. So when you start shallow and work your way out, start casting against shore and work your way. Don't start at like the 4 foot range and work out from there. Start super shallow and just work your way out, find out where they're at that day.
Exactly. And another tip that I would say is if you're just getting out for pike, and I do this for a lot of species in early spring, sleep in. Don't worry about getting to the lake super early. Oftentimes, even in early May, mid-May, you still have those really cold mornings, and then the sun comes up, heats up, it gets nice out, and you're like, oh, this is nice. So you start fishing in like a jacket, and then eventually you're in just the hoodie or maybe, a long sleeve shirt. So oftentimes fish activity, like they're cold-blooded creatures, as we talk about in all the podcasts, early in the morning when it's cold, they may be a little more sluggish and they may not be up shallow. So wait till it warms up a bit, maybe get on the water, 10, 11 o'clock, or even in the afternoon. In the evening can be a lot better. We happen to have better success ourselves for pike in the evening or like the afternoon in the evening. Always. Sometimes we'll get up early just because, you want to make the day, you want to make, full use of the day. And you're like, okay, we'll go. And you'll catch the odd one here and there. But what we find ourselves personally is we do way better from like, I'd say, I don't know what, 3 p.m. to like 7, 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pike, like they are ambush predators and they don't really have a lot, especially when they get bigger. They don't really have a lot that they're afraid of. Like they will, again, they're still trying to hide from like ospreys and whatnot. But other fish is not really something that's on their mind. They're the predator there. And so when they're in these areas and they, they're feeding midday and these other fish are retreating or they're just hiding in cover, pike will still eat them. They don't care. Like I haven't really noticed like too much of an off time for pike, but like I said, we have caught them in the morning, but yeah, it's midday is better than morning. Evening is better than midday. Yeah. It seems to get better as the day goes on.
Yeah. And I know there's going to be someone just shaking their head being like, I catch all the biggest pike in my lake at 5 a.m. That's great. If it's working, don't change it. For sure, don't change it. But that's just our opinion. That's why you're listening to our podcast. So that's pretty cool. So I thought we could just go into a little bit about lure choices because I think a lot of people, you definitely have lure. If you have lures, you probably have lures that work for pike. Don't overcomplicate it. I know when people are always like, pike are dumb. It's like, yes, small pike are usually dumb. Even larger pike are pretty dumb. They're not like stupid. I know in some areas, like we fished this one lake, gin clear water. We were getting follows from like high 30 pike and they would just follow our bait and not hit it. Like several times we'd have them just follow up. They'd either seen that lure before or they're just not interested or they're just smart enough. So not every pike out there is dumb as a brick, but generally speaking, most of them are not picky. I'd say they're not picky. That's a great way to say it. And it's like that with most fish. I think if you can get a lure to the fish at the proper area, past where it is, it generally, if it's hungry, is going to grab it, especially if it's a good presentation. So why don't we talk about some of our favorite pike lures? And we'll start off with Andrew. If we're going pike fishing and you have a bunch of rods, what is one bait that is always tied on right away in the morning? You know it's going to go, you're going to cast it. What's one of them? I know what you're going to say.
A white big blade chatterbait.
Yeah.
That's usually my go-to for no matter what I'm fishing, but pike especially. Like that is probably my best producing pike bait, is to get a big blade chatterbait or even regular chatterbait, a nice long slender trailer on that, like the chatter spike or just like a fluke or something, even a Senko. Throw a Senko on the back of that chatterbait, something that will just continually whip behind that chatterbait as a chatterbait gives the action.
Yeah.
And that's my go-to and what I've caught most of the pike on.
Yeah. And why would you say that is one of your first picks for lures?
It's one, it's versatile, so I can fish it at different depths and different speeds very easily. And so when I'm using it as a search bait, I can effectively search the area till I dial in where they're at. So let's say, and it's mostly weedless. So again, great going through cover. I can fish it at a variety of depths. I can let it sink down and then kind of reel it in and 4 feet down or 6 feet down and really slow roll it. Or I can burn it in across onto the surface. So it's something that I don't have to keep swapping baits for because I have confidence in it. I know it will work, and I can fish it a variety of ways to figure out what the fish are doing that day.
And I'd say one of the pros of a chatterbait, to add to the point that it's a search bait, which is a good term to use, because sometimes with pike, unless you're casting at a specific structure, like, oh, there's a tree in the water, I'm going to cast there might be a pike there. Sometimes pike are just kind of like in the weeds or along a weed edge, and you don't know exactly where they are, but you're kind of fan casting around. So a chatterbait is a great bait because you're just covering water. But I think one of the awesome things about a chatterbait that I like is pike tend to inhale baits. Like Andrew said, when they attack a bait, their mouth is open, and sometimes they completely inhale the bait and it'll be hooked pretty deep. And they have big teeth, if you didn't know. The more hooks on a lure, the worse it is to unhook them, obviously. So one of my least favorite lures to unhook pike on is a jerkbait, because sometimes they have 3 sets of treble hooks, which is absolutely terrible. Oftentimes you can do damage to the fish. Now, if you're keeping pike, which we do recommend in the early spring because they do taste very good, they're very underrated table fare for sure. If you've never tried pike, learn how to fillet them. Even do the easy 5-piece method if you have to. Try pike. It's actually very good. But the point is, chatterbaits only have one hook, one single hook. So when they inhale that bait, which oftentimes when you hook a pike on a chatterbait, it's like choked, like way down. It's easy to get out, which if you're doing catch and release fishing, as many people do for pike, it's great. Especially oftentimes you'll catch small pike, like really small pike, like 12, 13, 14 inches, and they just like ravage the bait. You can just literally grab the back of the hook with pliers while the fish is still in the water and just give it a shake, and the fish just pops off, which is great. Yeah. So that is a great thing. Another
spinner baits work really well as well. But the reason why I would say, again, my personal preference over a chatterbait is you can catch more pike on a chatterbait because it doesn't really go out of tune.
Yes.
Whereas a spinner bait, you catch 2-3 hammer handles on that, not even a big one, and that frame will be bent to bits.
It's true. Now, once I was going to say the next lure that I would pick is a spinner bait, because I do like spinner baits. The difference between, we get this a lot, the difference between a chatterbait and a spinner bait is a chatterbait is more about vibration and a spinner bait is more about flash. Now, you do get a lot of flash off of a chatterbait, but it's not as much as a spinner bait. And you do get a lot of vibration off a spinner bait, but it's not as much as a chatterbait. So if I'm trying to attract pike from a distance, I love a spinner bait. Number one, it's a lot more weedless than a chatterbait because the metal arm, the R-bend goes over the hook. So you can reel it through timber better than a chatterbait, weeds better than a chatterbait. And it has a lot of flash, which we all know pike, a lot of the best pike lures of all time, they're shiny. You got spinners and spoons, which we're going to go into, jerk baits. They like flash. So a spinnerbait is great. You can put a trailer hook on the back too, but there is one hook. You could add a trailer hook and have 2. You might catch a few more fish. I do notice that with pike, like I said, because they inhale it, I generally don't use a trailer hook for pike because they just tend to eat the thing. Like Andrew said, the bad thing about a spinnerbait is, depending on the quality of the spinnerbait you have, especially the wire frame, they just smash. Like they're literally like gators, like everyone says. They just bend the heck out of these. You might get a few pike out of a spinnerbait. One recommendation I would have is, if you do use spinnerbaits a lot, invest in some of those titanium T1 spinnerbaits, because you can bend the arm around all day long and it snaps back to the original shape. One of my favorite pike spinnerbaits though, Blackfly Lures. This is the big bastard. It's a slightly bigger spinnerbait. It's not musky size by any chance, but it's about 3/4 ounce instead of the usual 1/2 ounce. And I do like black. My favorite color overall is white. Same with chatterbaits. It's hard to beat white for pike. They just like it. And like we said, pike are visual feeders. White is very visible, so it's a great color for pike. Black is another classic color too. So a spinnerbait is a great bait. And again, if you're fishing around timber, weeds, rocks, anything that could snag your bait normally, I would definitely pick up a few spinnerbaits because they're very versatile. You can cast them anywhere. You can fish them at any depth. Say you're fishing shallow, just reel a bit faster over top of the weeds, count it down, fish it deep, or fish it fast. Same with a chatterbait. We love chatterbaits. We kind of got on a phase where for like many years, we're just like, all I want to fish is a chatterbait. And they work great. So yeah, but like you said, the big blade chatterbait has been absolutely great for us because it has the blade, I think, is 60% bigger than a regular chatterbait. So it throws off a lot of vibration and flash. And the hook on the back is a 6/0, which if you don't know hook sizes, it is huge. It's a gaff of a hook. So absolute great lure.
One of the other tips, I know we mentioned it before in the podcast, but especially for spinner baits, the frame design changes. So where you attach your line to. And one of the reasons why I really like, again, that the black fly lures is because he has a closed eye on the front.
Yeah.
Some they just have like an open band, which is great if you're tying your line directly to it. But for pike, you often use leaders to be able to prevent pike from, biting through your main line because their teeth are razor blades.
Yes.
So you don't want your main line getting in any, action with those. So if you use a leader though on a open frame spinnerbait, it'll just start to slide around and it can foul up and be pulling it kind of blades first. But if it has a closed eye, then you shouldn't have an issue with fouling up.
Yeah. And another thing you can do, here's a little tip. If you do have some spinnerbaits already and they don't have a closed eye, you can just grab a little piece of shrink tubing, or you could grab just a little piece of rubber, like a bobber stop, or what do you call these things? The little rubber piece that you put on a float.
Rip off a bit of the skirt and just tie it around the top.
Yeah, that's a great idea. But you can just do that so the leader doesn't slide up and down the lure. This is actually a spinnerbait that I picked up at the Sportsman Show from the Great Canadian Fishing Store. And this is made by a company called Underdock from Quebec. Never heard of them before, but I checked out the spinnerbait. It's actually a tungsten spinnerbait. I know we talked about it before on the podcast. Nice. We talked about it and then I went and I bought it because I actually liked it. But it has a tungsten head. So it's a compact size, but it's very heavy. So it can cast really far and fish a bit deeper. And then it has this special system here so you can change the hook out. So there's actually a split ring and everything down here. So unlike a regular spinnerbait, which the hook is built into the head, if the hook ever gets dull or whatever, you have to pretty much buy a new spinnerbait. But this one, you can actually interchange it. And what I did is I put some heat shrink tubing on that to keep the hook straight. It looks like it's going to be a killer for me this spring. So I'm excited to try that out. Again, another cool little local bait. I'll link it down below. Again, we're not affiliated with this guy at all, but very cool spinnerbait. I'm excited. It's gonna get trashed by a pike, but hey, what can you do? So another lure I know me and Andrew are big fans of is spoons.
Yes.
I know if you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, you'll know exactly what two spoons we're going to talk about. Andrew's going to tell you his favorite, which is
the Williams Wobbler.
Yep, and I'm going to
hammered silver.
I'm going to tell you my favorite, and I actually found my absolute favorite, which is the Len Thompson #2 in Fire Tiger. Fire Tiger on the front, nickel on the back. So it's got a really good flash. Pike love, like we said, highly visible colors. Fire Tiger is one of those colors. It's great. And like Andrew, the hammered silver, it just throws off.
Tons of flash.
Throws off so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, made in Canada as well. So highly recommend using that. Another cool thing about spoons is they're so easy to fish. If I'm taking someone pike fishing that's never piked fished before or never fished, I just hand them a rod, a spinning rod with a Williams Wobbler on it or a Johnson Silver Minnow because they're weedless. I'm like, just cast it out, let it sink like whatever I tell them, like 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and then just reel it in at a slow, like a medium pace. And the lure's just, sashaying behind the boat and pike just become unglued for those things. They don't just like nip them, they crush them. Like they crush them like they hate them.
A spoon bite is fun.
Yeah.
It's really
There's
fun.
no like, oh, how do I know when I have a bite? It's like, you'll know, my friend. The thing just smashes it. So
it feels different. Of all the different things, like I know growing up, it was like, oh, you'll reel into some weeds and you're like, oh, is that a fish? And like, how do I know when I have a fish? And a spoon bite is one of those things where you don't guess. Like when you're reeling in, it just pulls on a weed. It's like, okay, that's clearly a weed, and you just rip it out of the weed, and you're fine. When a pike hits, it pulls your rod forward.
Yes,
like it's not just your lure ran into a mouth. Like no, this pike is trying to kill it and run away with it.
Exactly. And I know we can't mention spoons without mentioning spinners because it kind of goes hand in hand. They do totally opposite things. Spinners spin and spoons don't spin. They kind of just wobble.
Yes.
But spinners are great.
If your spoon is spinning, you're fishing it wrong.
Yeah, you're fishing it too fast. You got to slow it down. You'll catch much more fish on a spoon if you reeled in at the proper speed. And it's just wobbling back and forth. Spinners are great.
Mhm.
One of my favorite spinners of all time. It's hard to beat a Mepps. Everyone knows Mepps I think it's the number one selling lure of all time. And there's a reason for that because they just flat out catch fish. I love the Black Fury number 4. It's black blade, and then I tie a black feathered treble, or you can buy the black, squirrel tail. Those are great for pike, and they catch anything else, which is great. It's a multi-purpose lure. The Aglia Long, one of my favorites. Number 4.
Love the Aglia Long.
Runs a bit deeper. And again,
even the number 3 is great for any species too.
Yeah. And you'd be surprised sometimes the size of the pike you'll catch on a small Mepps spinner. And the same goes with muskie too. Sometimes you're using like a number 3 or number 4 Mepps spinner and just casting it for whatever. And you'll just get like a massive muskie come out of nowhere and just smash it. Unfortunately, usually bite you off because you're not using wire leaders. But yeah, so definitely have a few spinners in your box. What I'm going to do is I'm going to link below some of our favorite pike lures down in the description below. And I'm just going to link them to just random tackle shops that, whatever. But find the lure that you like if you're just getting into it. Buy it from your local tackle shop and go out and catch some fish. Now, before we go on, we actually have a very unique giveaway this week. So I was Oh man, Andrew, we need to get some giveaways going because last month in April, we had 4 giveaways, which is crazy. This month, we have 2 really cool ones. And one of them is it's weird. So listen to this. Andrew's going to tell you.
So we just talked about all these lures that you're going to want to go out and buy. And then if you're not prepared, promptly lose on the next pike that bites it. So I thought for this giveaway, we'd be doing a giveaway for some legitimate leaders, some fluorocarbon leaders, whatever you want. So I've been making them for a while. I know we've talked about it a couple times before on the podcast, but this time we're going to give out $60 worth of custom leaders. So whatever you want, we're going to announce the winner later on. Jess will have that on the Patreon, and then he'll get you in contact with me and we can talk about whatever length you want for pound test. I know if we're targeting pike, I often like fishing 100-pound test leader. 50 also works great. 100 is one of those things where I have no concern ever of it snapping. 50 is what I'll often use, around the Kawarthas or whatnot, because I'm not going for the trophies. And yet, even if I caught one, I still have full confidence in that 50-pound leader. But it's great because I can fish these smaller baits with it. I can fish even topwater. I can fish frogs with a 50-pound fluoro leader. That's about 7 inches long or so, and it won't sink the frog. So we have those as well. We call them the just-in-case leaders. So even in summer, let's say you're not targeting pike later on. Let's say, that's not your thing. You're one of those guys that hates pike. I don't know why you're listening to this episode, but thanks. If you're a bass fisherman or something like that, the just-in-case leaders is something that I know I can never find in stores, but something that I frequently use. It's almost always on my rod when I'm fishing jerk baits, topwaters, whatever. And I can still fish those baits effectively. And I haven't lost one yet to a pike, which is saving me hundreds of dollars every year.
Yeah. I'll have to say, though, about the just-in-case leaders. So we've been testing these for about 2 years now. And we fished this one lake, and it is full of nice bass. It's a nice bass lake. But unfortunately, it also has a lot of pike. And not big ones per se, but generally they're like... not even that, they're not worth catching when you're bass fishing. Like if I caught like a high 20s to 30-inch pike, I'd be like, nice. But these fish are like 14 inches long. So they're annoying. And they bite off my frogs. Yeah. They bite off my chatterbaits. They bite off everything. And you think it's a bass. So you swing on it, right? And then it just twing, little pike. And you'll see it swim away with your chatterbait in its mouth. And then, maybe you're not fishing jackhammers and you just lost $25. But even if you lose a $10 lure, I don't like leaving fish with lures in their mouth. That's kind of cruel. But I also don't like losing baits. So what I did the last 2 years is I used some of Andrew's just-in-case leaders. I like them short when I'm bass fishing, 6-7 inches, 50-pound fluorocarbon. If it's light enough that you don't really notice that much of any action change when you use it on a bait. So if you're fishing this lure on a chatterbait, I don't notice any action loss. So I have full confidence using it in this lake 100% of the time when I'm bass fishing. And not that bass are line shy, but the fact that it's clear, it gives me that like confidence in my mind that I'm like, okay, the bass can't see it. Not that it would matter because you could tie a straight braid anyway, but I used it all last year and the year before. I caught some of my biggest bass of last year on it when I was using a chatterbait. So I have no thought at all that the bass are spooked off by this. Now, again, we're not fishing a gin clear lake, but for regular bass fishing and weedy stumpy areas, if there's pike or even muskie in the lake, definitely have one of these, because you'll save, even if you buy 1 leader and it saves you 1 lure, not only did you not kill a fish or get a hook stuck in their mouth and they swim away with it, but you just save $10 on your lure.
Some of the things that I when I started making them, because for a long time I grew up and I'd fish those, cheap wire leaders.
Yeah.
I mean, they work for a long time, except over the years I've had a number of them fail. Sometimes I bought the whole pack and the whole pack is duds and is snapping on me, and I don't know why. But the fluorocarbon leaders are great. So some of the things I really like about it is with fluorocarbon, you can visually inspect it to see, if you caught a pike, you look at it and say, hey, that's a deep gash. Okay, maybe I'll swap out that leader now. Whereas a wire leader gets kinked to bits, and then the nylon coating hides any breakages, and you don't know that there's an issue with it until you put a weight on it and like the next fish.
Yeah.
and then it's gone.
Or you cast really abruptly and your lure just snaps off. It's like, no.
And another thing too is I found a lot of the wire leaders that are, bright silver and they're giving a lot of flash. And to me, I don't like having like a silver swivel or a big silver snap. So all the stuff that I usually have, I use like small copper crimps that are painted black. Any of the swivels I have that I use are painted black. The only thing that's chrome ever is the solid welded ring, which is a very small ring that I'll use in place of a swivel just because it saves a lot of weight. Again, to prevent action loss. But even the snaps, like I don't have these huge silver things shining above my bait, creating a very visible line that may create some more line shy. So I kind of wanted, when I made these for myself, Jesse and I, we talked a lot, and I wanted to get something where if I'm going to make it, I'm going to make everything that I possibly could to make it the best I could for what we like.
Yeah.
So that's what we've done. So anyways, the giveaway, again, $60 worth of leaders. So that should get you if you want musky leaders, or if you want, musky trolling leaders, pike leaders, or if you just want those just in case leaders where you don't want to lose any of your stuff when you're fishing for bass and whatnot. One fortunate Patreon subscriber is going to be able to get that shortly.
Yeah. And again, like you mentioned, how do you enter these giveaways every month? You have to be a Patreon supporter, someone who donates a few bucks a month to help cover the cost of the show, so that me and Andrew don't have to pay for it out of our own pocket. The benefit is you get a warm, fuzzy feeling for supporting me and Andrew and helping us run this weekly podcast that has expenses, of course. But at the same time, you also get added into the raffles every month to win awesome prizes. And I actually just packaged up the Great Lakes Finesse box the other day and shipped it out to Ben, who won. Congratulations, Ben. I'm pretty mad. I wanted to win that.
That was a good
giveaway. Actually, a lot of them were really good. So definitely consider becoming a Patreon member to help support the show. But you can, put your name inside of the hat to win some pretty cool prizes. So thanks, Andrew, for that. So I thought we could we talked about a bunch of lures, and we didn't go in depth. If you want to go in depth about other pike fishing lures, I'll link below our pike episodes that we did last year if you hadn't listened to them, because we went in depth about all kinds of different lures. There's all different types of lures that work great for pike. Like some of them, like jerk baits, we didn't talk about because the podcast that we did a few weeks ago, we talked in depth about jerk baits. Or the one last year, we went in depth about it. So I'll link those below. You can check those out. Now we're going to go to a cool section of this podcast, which is going to be AOA Q&A. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, because I put up a question on our Instagram that said, ask us anything and we'll answer it on the podcast. So I'm going to read, we actually got about 25 questions, which is pretty good. I just put it up about an hour ago. So I thought we could answer these pretty quick. I know we kind of ramble usually, but we're going to keep these quick because I want to cover most of them. Some of these are actually really good questions. I know I always say that, but sometimes everyone's like, you like bass fishing? It's like, that's not a good question. Like, ask me something challenging. I want to hear something challenging.
That's right, little Billy. We don't want to answer your question about if we like bass fishing or not.
Here's a good one from someone who I can't pronounce their last name. He says, it's bass opener. You have 3 combos in your boat. What are you pre-tying on to start the day?
A frog, a chatterbait, and I would say a weedless fluke. Weightless fluke.
That's good. Okay. So I'm going to start off with a chatterbait of always. Chatterbaits are great. I'm going to have, a weedless wacky worm, something on like a weedless jig head. That's like a do-it-all bait that can catch them anywhere. And then I'm going to have on just like a Texas rig, depending on the weight, like 1/4 ounce, 3/8 of an ounce with like a craw bait, just something that I can pitch around shallow. Because, like that time of year, the bass are kind of shallow still. So all my presentations, like Andrew's too, are still shallow baits. So another cool question is, This is the Morning Voice. He says, what are your thoughts on listening to music or podcasts while fishing? Well, if it's the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast, I highly recommend it. We don't really listen to music or podcasts when we're fishing because generally we either are just concentrating and enjoying nature or we're talking. Me and Andrew are friends. Obviously, we've been friends for many years. We're actually related. So we talk nonstop. Like, you think this podcast is just us like making a podcast? Our whole life has been a podcast. Now we're just recording our conversation.
You're just getting the little snippets that we're giving you. That's all.
Yeah. I will say though, this is just my thought. One of my biggest pet peeves is when I'm fishing, trying to enjoy the quiet of nature and someone's blasting music from their boat. I absolutely hate that. But if you're in kind of a lake that's more public, then doesn't bother me.
For me, most of the time, I'm not listening to anything. If I am fishing on my own and like Jesse's not around, like if Jesse's around, we never have anything playing. It's just us talking and we lose our voices by the end of the day, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm on my own, I actually have bone conducting headphones. So they don't cover right in the ear. I like it because I can just have it quietly. I'll be playing sometimes a podcast. Sometimes I'll have, just some like relaxing music, but then I can still enjoy some nature. And it's also a safety thing for me in the boat. I wouldn't want to have, noise cancellation headphones and not be able to hear someone screaming if they're in trouble or something like that, or not hear a boat approaching.
Yeah, that's good.
But most of the time I don't.
Here's another interesting question. What's the most important non-angling related accessory you take fishing?
Life jacket.
Is that not a non-angling accessory? Yeah, I guess that is.
It's a boating accessory.
Yeah. I'd say that is the most important thing to bring. Yeah. Another thing that I'd say that is very important for me anyway, because we tend to take a lot of video and we have a lot of GoPros and drones running now, is a power box. Highly recommend making your own power box because you can make your own power box. They're very easy and cheap and they will power your cell phone. You don't have to worry about your phone dying. You can charge your GoPros. You can do all that stuff. Yeah, definitely a power box. Something that
I've got another great one actually.
What?
Sunglasses and a hat.
Yes, because Andrew remembers the day he forgot his hat.
You get a rude nickname when you go camping and forget your hat, and then burn, and then wear a sun UV thing over your head, and you get called tapeworm.
Yeah. So funny story behind that. Me and Andrew go on a 3-day Algonquin fishing trip. He forgets everything. He forgot his pillow.
I forget the hat in the car.
He forgot his hat
in the car.
Yeah. So I gave him like a sun buff and he just like put it over his head and he looked like a tapeworm. I just called him Tapey all weekend.
If I don't have a hat and I don't protect my head from the sun, and I have a receding hairline now, and so if I get a lot of sun, I get a really bad headache. Like I'm notorious for getting sunstroke and stuff like that. So a hat is of vital importance for me in the summer, especially.
Yeah. Here's a good question. Will the Sports Bell be getting Live Scope? So if I did buy Live Scope,
as soon as he buys it for us.
Yeah. If I did get Live Scope, which I'm not against, at first when Live Scope came out, I was so against it. And I was like, that is ridiculous. But me and Andrew were just talking about this the other day. I feel like if it got banned from fishing tournaments, I don't see that as a bad thing. Like I wouldn't be against that either way. But I feel like if you're fishing like just for fun, or like you're a guy that's a guide, I feel like it's a tool that can be used. It does give you an unfair advantage. And not everyone can afford it. So I think that's the main thing that makes it an unfair advantage. If everyone had it, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, right? But no, not in my Sports Bell because I don't want to put electronics that cost double the worth of my boat motor and trolling motor into my Sports Bell. If someone gave me Live Scope, I would 100% use it. I'm not going to lie. But no time soon we're getting Live Scope. Andrew's like, I am right now.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah.
After just 18 more years of savings, I'll be getting my own.
Here's a good question. This guy says he lives in the GTA area. What months are the best time to catch pike? So we kind of covered that here. I'd say the best month, in my opinion, to catch a giant pike is March. If you can fish some of these back bays where these big females, like we said, are pushing into spawn, that's the time when you're going to have the best chance of catching a big pike. But I'd say my favorite month overall to catch pike is May. That's why we're doing this podcast.
It's more comfortable.
It's more comfortable. There's more, the season's open. You're not fishing, just basically just spawning areas. So you have, a lot of areas.
The water temperature isn't 35 degrees.
Yeah, that's always nice. But even if you're fishing from shore, there's lots of access to go fishing for pike in May. And it's still cold enough, like we said, that there's still a lot of fish shallow. So you don't have to be, you don't need a boat. You can fish from shore. There's lots of great shore access to catch pretty good pike. We've caught really nice pike in May. Throughout the summer, it gets a little bit tougher because, like we said, a lot of the bigger pike go deep. and you may not have as much access to them without, a boat. So from shore, definitely the spring, early spring. Here's a good question from Colton. He says, Texas rig versus skirted jig with a craw trailer if you had to pick only one, and why? So basically a Texas rig versus a jig.
I would say Texas rig purely because I've fished it for longer. I have more confidence in it. I know I can fish heavy cover and not heavy cover with it. I could fish, a lay down like a tree, or I could also flip it right into some heavy stuff or underneath a dock. Whereas a jig, you can fish, heavy weeds, but it's not as weedless as a Texas rig.
Yeah. Same with me. I'd say just because I grew up fishing a very sloppy, weedy lake, I've found that Texas rigs are a little better for that. And I do find you get more bites on a Texas rig. You generally get bigger bites on a jig. So that's a hard one for me. It really, I guess it depends where I was fishing. But if I was fishing the lakes that I normally fish already, I'd probably say Texas rig, just because a Texas rig is a little more versatile in my opinion. And you do get more bites on it. I just find like we fish a lot of weeds and it just slips through the weeds a little better. So although I have caught some donkeys on jigs, like absolute donkeys, like biggest fish of the trip kind of deal. Like, oh, yeah. Here's a good question. You should let me go fishing with you guys. That's not a question.
Disqualified.
So here's a good question from Derek. He says, you have 3 hours in the water. Are you hopping around or sticking to known favorite spots? 3 hours. It's not a lot of time. That sounds like a lot of time, but it's not.
I would say if I have 3 hours, it depends. Well, he says if it's known spots. So let's say it's a lake that I know, I'm probably going to stick to known spots because I know the best route I can take to save travel time on. So I'm getting the most time on the water actually fishing. If it's a new lake, I would say running and gunning until I'm finding fish and then just stay there.
Yeah. Same with me. Like 3 hours is not a lot of time to find new spots unless you're just fishing like shoreline structure. If you're looking for actually like, rock piles or weed lines, you're going to eat up a lot of time just trying to find those. So I would definitely fish spots that I already know. Here's a good question. Actually, I had two similar questions. So one of them is, on a scale from 1 to 10, how excited are you for muskie opener and baits for opener? And that's from Mitch. And another guy asked, any updates for go-to muskie lures? He's planning a trip to Burleigh Falls for opener. So I guess for muskie lures, I actually looked at this question before. Didn't tell Andrew. So I have a few of my favorite early season muskie lures that I'm going to have ready to go. Again, we have lots of lures. Me and Andrew have tons of muskie lures, but I'm trying to bring less this year. So speaking of early season muskie, like opener is coming up really soon for muskie. Like we're really excited. For 1 to 10, I'd say like a solid 9. Like I like fishing in the fall for muskie much better than fishing in June, but any opener is really exciting, especially when you like the thing. So one lure that I'm going to have tied on 100%, I picked these up the other day. This is the Chaos Tackle Micro Medusa. I've never used this before, but I have so much confidence in it because the mini Medusa, which is, I'd say probably double or triple the size of this, I've caught several muskie on. This smaller one, it's about an ounce, I think, maybe 3/4. It's just like, if you've ever seen a Medusa, I forget how Andrew described it before, but it just looks like an alien with 3 tails on the back. It's a big twister. You kind of just pause them. You can just straight retrieve them. You can't fish them wrong as long as the tentacles are twitching in the back. So that's going to be one of the starters I start off. This is a black and orange. It's a smaller bait, but in early season, generally you're using smaller baits for muskie.
I have a suggestion. I was going to say the Mepps Muskie Killer. It's a smaller spinner, a nice bucktail, but that's a great springtime presentation.
Yeah, I have one right here. That's actually one of the first baits I usually toss. It's either a Mepps Muskie Killer or the bucktail, or the Joe Bucher 500 size, which is very similar in size. They're very small baits. They're not what you'd consider like a big muskie bait, but giant muskies get caught in these every single year. The problem with these is they don't weigh that much, so they're hard to cast on actual muskie gear. So you kind of have to use pretty much beefed up bass gear for these, but they catch big fish. Another lure that I always have ready to go for muskie is a whopper plopper. This is the biggest bass size you can get. Now they do have a bigger muskie size, but this particular one I've caught a few muskie on. And I've missed many muskie on, unfortunately, because they're like pike. They have bad aim. But this one is like 5 inches long, and I think it weighs like an ounce, something like that. So it's not a huge muskie bait, but especially an opener when they're shallow, I find this bait, it's not overly aggressive. So you can get a lot of hits on it. It's not a huge bait. And then a classic bait that I know Andrew caught one of his biggest muskies on. Great all year round, but around the early summer, J13 Rapala You can't beat that.
Yeah.
That's a great pike lure too. It's just like a 5-inch bait, jointed. It floats. You reel it in and it wiggles, and that's it. So all kinds of musky baits on tap. A few diverized baits, this little 6-inch ones like this Titan from Livingston Lures.
Some of the things to keep in mind too is like in the spring when we're fishing bass opener, the amount of times I'll have a muskie bite us off in the quarters or something like that is because we're fishing bass sized tackle. And again, we'll lose a couple chatterbaits, until we got the just in case leaders. But shameless self plug.
Yeah.
But like muskie going for a even like a chatterbait or a spinnerbait, like you can get muskie sized chatterbaits, but they're usually like much heavier. Some of them still have a smaller profile, which would be great for the spring, but they can also run like quite deep. And so if you're fishing some shallower areas, you could still get 5/8 ounce chatterbaits and put that with, like, let's say a large twister tail, like a 5 or 6 inch twister tail on the back of that thing. And again, just brief set the profile a little bit. Again, is kind of a large bass sized bait, and muskie would crush it.
Yeah. Basically what we do is we use big bass baits or small musky baits. Another bait that I'm excited to use this year is I'm trying to get into using glide baits more. So this is a little Rapala twitch and wrap. It's just like a little 4-inch, like what they call a glide bait. It's not like a bass glide bait. This is a musky glide bait, which has been around way longer than the bass glide baits. So we're going to call them glide baits. But it just has like a zigzag walk the dog action underwater. And it has a triggering action because as you twitch it, you let it pause and then twitches it again. It kind of causes fish to react because oftentimes in early musky season, the fish aren't overly aggressive yet. They're kind of being a bit picky. So yeah, we're excited for our opener. We're actually, we're going to go out. We're hopefully going to catch some fish. And then throughout the summer, before it gets too hot, me and Andrew, I'm going to force him this year to catch a fish on rubber. And we're going to do it, I can almost guarantee, before July. We're going to get him a fish on rubber. And it's going to be a very proud 26-inch fish. Just kidding. We're going to go for that 46 this year.
The small ones look the prettiest, let's be honest.
Oh, they do. Yeah. So why don't we do 2 more questions? Here's a question from BH Anglers. She says, what are your dream fishes to catch? Species, size, and place to catch them.
2 that I would love to do a destination thing for would be Arctic char and Arctic grayling up in the territories and stuff up north. Those are 2 that would be absolute dream fish for me to catch. And another one, kind of that'd be like the same trip. Grayling really interests me for some reason. I don't really know why. It's just the giant fin. I love it. And the other one would be peacock bass in the Amazon. Just they get big and just crush, like chopping topwaters. Like that's that's so cool.
Yeah, you see the footage of them fishing for peacock bass, and they're just chucking out these big topwaters with these props on them, and they're just like, and they're working them so aggressively. I'm like, nothing would hit that, and this 17-pound peacock bass just comes up and bites the thing in half.
Sending a 3-foot spray of like water in front of it, and bass are crushing it.
That would literally be what mine would be. We're gonna end this AOA Q&A with a question from Open for Bassness. He says, what is your ultimate goal with regards to AOA in the podcast? That's a complicated question because for the longest time, we've just been doing this for fun. Like, we don't make any money off this. We just do it for fun. I think the answer to that right now would be personal satisfaction. I know Tony, he asked this question. He is a very handy guy. He builds stuff. He does all kinds of construction stuff. And obviously when you build something, like me and Andrew both work with our hands, when you build something, very satisfying, especially when people compliment you on it, you're like, oh, it wasn't that hard, but it was really hard, in fact. So I think building an Instagram account to the point where we can go to shows and people want to talk to us and want to come up and shake our hand, that's very satisfying. It's great. It's humbling, really. And creating a podcast out of nothing with no one behind us, no networks, nothing, and just getting the podcast to the point where we have like big wigs and industry guys like who know who we are and want to come talk to us. That to me, it's just like, wow, we did it. That's great. Now for the future, I don't know. We're kind of still working on that. We're really happy with all the support that everyone gives us, but at the same time, to produce a show every week and create content and all that stuff, I don't want to sound like we're in this to make money, but when you work full time, me and Andrew both work full time. We have other obligations. We have family. We have other things that we have to deal with, and then get all this extra work popped on top of you. It would be great if we could ever work less at our day jobs and do this. Will that ever happen? We don't know. We're in the process of figuring that out. Until then, we're just going to have fun and keep doing this. So we really do appreciate when you guys give us reviews or send us a message and say that you appreciate it, because that's what keeps us going. And we do appreciate, again, those on Patreon. who donate a few bucks a month. There are expenses to this podcast. We always mention that, but there are a bunch of people out there, guys and girls, that give us a few bucks a month, just like $2. They're like, thanks for the podcast. I listen every week. It's like 50 cents an episode. I mean, like, that's pretty cheap, right? It really helps us out, and we don't have to have that stress, having to come out of our own pockets to do that. So I don't know how to answer that question yet, but we are happy that you are listening. So that's the thing, Tony. You said, what is your ultimate goal? Our goal is to make a podcast for Tony to listen to. So it's a pretty sad goal, but it's okay. Before we end this episode, we have, as tradition states, the quote of the week. And to handle that, we have the man with a mustache, Andrew. He's like, I always forget.
I was going to do what you did to me a little while ago. I'm going to make you rhyme. You have to come up with the last.
I'm the worst at rhyming.
I'm gonna be better than having you try and rhyme with mouth, though.
Okay, that was pretty cruel. I'm not gonna lie.
Teach a man to fish for a day,
and his wife will make him clean all his clothes, throw him into the shower, and tell him to go away.